Comparisons they're not necessary. History doesn't repeat it, right? I think that's kind of what's going on here in Austin. Organism can grow without sunlight, right? Like you need sunlight. You have to have it. That's what permission is for builders. There has to be a permissive environment. And if people feel that the environment's permissive, they're just going to go there and build. You can clearly see that the brain of this thing it's emerged. Robotics, AI, data centers are being built on natural gas fields. Dell computers in Austin, Texas, scales right off the back of Intel as their biggest OEM. It was the early start of the distributed internet for personal computing. So you have a direct line from Intel computing, a direct line from the beginning of Silicon Valley with Arthur Rock Venture Capital and Intel computers. You have a direct spiritual succession line from Silicon Valley to Austin.
Austin will go through kind of a rebirth.
Most advanced technology in the world, and if you can't actually build it or ship it, then what's the point?
You need storytellers who are able to paint the picture of what's happening at the frontiers of technology.
The U.S. needs to get back more to that and less like lawyerish and more we're building stuff.
The frontier isn't just a place, it's forged in the fire. Welcome to Austin Next.
Nate, welcome to Austin Next.
And thanks for having me.
This is going to be fun. I think we're going to end up going all over the place, just like we do whenever we have a conversation.
Yes, we tend to go all over the place.
Yeah, last time was what? We had AI, orbital data centers, and everything else in between. So
yeah, exactly.
I want to start off like how we met. So it was, you posted on X just like how hard it is to connect into Austin. I think you'd been here a couple of years at this point, as had I. And of course, I raised my hand and said, hey, how's it going? We should meet. I kind of want to just get into like what you were feeling at that moment. Was it, you know, when I'm not finding the right people, it's just very fragmented. I just wanted a sense of like your impression of Austin in that first couple of years.
That was a really unfair comment, honestly, in hindsight. We were just coming out of the pandemic. My experience of when I had first gotten to Silicon Valley was a very unique experience that I've now learned was very unique to Silicon Valley at that specific time in San Francisco, kind of peninsula, the time frame that I got there. And so I was making a comparison. And I don't think that was
I'm going to want to unpack that time frame too. Yeah,
we definitely will. And that was an unfair comparison. For sure it was an unfair comparison. In the years since, I've kind of gotten to know kind of a few more of the ins and outs of Austin and kind of how to get ingratiated more into it. I, at that point in time, had a very nice welcoming committee that had really opened up their arms to me. So I feel like that comment got blown out of proportion. And
that never happens on social media ever, you know?
And it sounded like I was like talking down on Austin, and I really was not. It was more of wanting to kind of bring the sinew and the tissue and the connectivity that I'd kind of felt pulsating in Silicon Valley around the time that I'd gotten there. Wanted to feel that here, and it is here, and we'll get into it, it's different. And I'm really excited about actually where Austin is right now at this particular point in time. And I'm happy to be on the show here and kind of get into that.
So I do want to go back. So when did you move to Silicon Valley? And like, talk to me about that moment and what it was and how you kind of then, what it was you were comparing Austin to.
It was a really riveting experience landing in Silicon Valley in 2011. You're at the beginning of the Web 2 cycle. Think Slack, Airbnb, Uber, Lyft, etc. You're at the beginning of that cycle. There were a lot of like really cool kind of third spaces where builders, investors, innovators, engineers, product people were all hanging out, building, partying, doing all kinds of stuff. And so it was like at the Caltrain stop, you had a coffee shop called the Creamery. Also on the other end of the Caltrain stop in Palo Alto, you had the Pete's Coffee in Palo Alto. And then you had Rocket Space and
what's Rocket? Is that a coffee shop or something else?
No, it was like a co-work space.
Co-work space, okay.
Yeah. So you had all these spaces. Uber was started there.
Yeah.
That's where Travis was, at a table with like 5 people. I met him actually in end of 2010 there. So, and it was just a very electric environment, I would say, coming from the Midwest, coming from Kansas City, which is a very old school
I understand
Midwestern.
why you're a Chiefs fan.
Yeah, now you understand. People think I'm a bandwagon, but I've literally been a Chiefs fan in the worst of times. Very old school Midwestern city, very parochial, very industry driven, meaning that unless you're an insider inside of like, there are a lot of big architectural firms, for instance, in Kansas City. And unless you were like inside of that industrial complex and grew up in it, you weren't going to be able to break into it. There were no outsiders coming into that, right? And that's just one industry, for example, in Kansas City. So, which is very typical of Midwestern cities and somewhat East Coast cities as well. If you go, try to break into finance in New York, it's very parochial, right?
There are paths to get in.
There are pathways to get in. It's very relationship driven, family driven, all of these things. Who did you go to school with?
Right.
All of these things, right? And the reason why I was jarring coming to Silicon Valley in 2011 is because none of that existed, right? It was like, I show up as a literal nobody. Like, nobody knows who I am. I'm just this guy from Kansas City trying to build some things or do some things. And I could get a meeting with almost anybody at the time. So we talk about that Pete's Coffee in Palo Alto. I was able to meet with Guy Kawasaki right there at that Pete's. I met with everybody who I'd been reading about in TechCrunch, who I was interested in. Either I was able to meet them or be connected to them on email and have an exchange with them. And this was a completely foreign concept to me at the time. Being a young professional, it seemed like, and being a bit of a hustler too, it was like, I've got to move here. I have to move here because my superpowers and this place are just going to be a perfect fit. And so I did everything to move myself and my family to Silicon Valley at the time, and it worked for exactly those reasons. And so...
Okay, I'm going to have a dumb question here. We have coffee shops. We have So, I mean, is it just simply like, you said like Travis and they were just the people who were at those places, or was something different in the way that these third places are happening?
It just felt like a revolution. You got to realize, at this point in time, the prestige careers were finance, big finance. I'm not talking about venture. Big finance, consulting, like KPMG, all the others. The big banks, big banking, Goldman, etc. These were the prestige careers. This is where if you graduated from HBS, GSB, whatever, these were the careers. And then the movie dropped,
right?
The Social Network. Then the big valuation announcements started rolling in. And this like huge light bulb went off at all of these schools, all of these top 20 U.S. News and World Report schools. And there was an influx of people who said, I'm gonna sleep on the floor with 5 other people to an apartment and code every day and go out and sell every day and hope to do the same thing. Like virtually a gold rush started from 2011 all the way to 2016. It felt like a gold rush. So that was the energy of it.
I had a conversation on the podcast with Tyler, who was at the time the head of Antler, and we talked about how like true innovation entrepreneurship is countercultural. Like you could say like whether it's contrarian, the kind of things like if you want to build something, you have to be thinking different than everybody else.
Yes.
And the moment that Social Network made it cool, like is it the same people who felt felt it became cool because of the movie? Did they end up becoming actual builders, and like the real builders, or the people who we look back at that era who built these things weren't as influenced by the movie? You see what I'm saying?
So you're talking about revolutions and cycles. You're talking about being counterculture, that innovation has to come from outside ideas, that breakthrough ideas are not on consensus. This is actually the core tenet that I think Andreessen Horowitz actually was able to break through invention on, which is to find people building non-consensus ideas that sound ridiculous but actually are the new way of doing things, particularly around the way that consumer behavior works. And so they kind of built the early days, they built an incredible media operation around this idea that outsiders, particularly founders, with ideas that were non-consensus, were the ideas to back. And so some of the most contentious partner meetings at Andreessen Horowitz produced some of the biggest returns. And I've often heard it said in the halls of Andreessen Horowitz when I worked there that the more contentious and the more passionate the disagreement about a company, the better the sign is that that company is probably one of those types of companies.
How do you balance in those type, especially the kind of people who are there and the headbutting, and I mean that in the best way possible, right? You can have the contention and be wrong, right? So how do you, like, so if this thing is more contentious in a yes versus a no, like what is the group dynamics?
Well, I don't know. I mean, it's just the question that often gets asked is like, you can find thousands of reasons why something won't work.
Sure.
But if the one reason that it can work produces potentially a huge, gigantic outcome, then you have to ask yourself and explore that question, what if it works? And that's the interesting question. And I think that's where you get to the power. That's where you actually begin to scale the power law. Because if you back a bunch of founders who have a really elite superpower, you don't look at their weaknesses anymore. You say, okay, what if no one can outcompete this founder at doing this? And if this particular skill and way of doing things becomes the key insight into a new market, this is going to be an elite world-class founder in 3-4 years. We want to invest now. We don't want to invest when we don't have a premium, once everybody knows, because then it becomes consensus.
Right.
Then it's obvious. So the way that you bring back alpha to LPs is you invest in things that are non-obvious. But I mean, everybody says this now. In hindsight, everybody talks this way. But in 2011, people were not talking this way. And in some ways, that's a credit to the power and the output of A16Z's media operation, in that they've changed the entire way that we talk about founding companies and markets.
What happens now in something where it's flipped, right? A lot of the narrative sense is set by A16Z, and now they're going through this whole new, it's the next level of media, right? Bringing on Eric and everything that they're kind of building out. Eric's
one of the first person I met when I got to Silicon Valley in 2011. Great human being, awesome person.
If I can put anything out there, I want him to do live players again with Sam. Like, it was like one of my favorite shows, and since he went to A16Z, it seems to be done. And I would really like that to come back. It was one of the most fascinating things that's out there. Yeah. But so, like, by now, at your point, like, they were being the pirates versus being like the Navy, right? Like the kind of they're in many ways setting the agenda right now. I mean, there was all, you know, recently obviously on X, that chart that they put out about, they were showing like, I
saw you tweet that.
Well, and look, I will say, so the chart in particular, if anyone see it, was like new funds or new venture companies created over the last few years, and it was like everybody was down, and then like SF was up, and this is not A16Z's fault because they pulled it straight from a Silicon Valley Bank report. It's like, I saw that report, and the question is like, why wasn't Austin on this list? Like, what's the, you know, you had Miami, you had Chicago, you had Denver, you had DC, you had Atlanta. Like, there was this kind of thing, like, did it show something? Did it show data that would look the opposite? And, you know, not
kind of pull me into something.
No, I'm not saying that's what I said. They didn't make they made the slide prettier, but like they took it from somebody. So they had.
I don't know. I don't know why it matters. I get why. Sometimes
we're the rebels. We have to, you know.
They get very touchy about how they're compared. I don't think there needs to be a comparison. These things form over a 60 or 80 year period.
Yeah.
I'm a big studier of spiritual succession. I think all great things have a spiritual successor. So let's, you know, if you go back to the origins of Silicon Valley, let's go back to Arthur Rock, Davis and Rock Company. Basically invented venture capital as a category. A few different things around that was allowing employees to move around without handcuffing them. And so this allowed people to take some of their knowledge and take it and start new things. The other thing being they invented kind of equity investing and structured financings over stages. The whole idea around that, but not to get too deep in the weeds on that. But there's a spiritual succession, which is basically Arthur Rock invests in Fairchild Semiconductors. Mm-hmm. Two guys leave Fairchild. It becomes Intel. Right? Intel.
No effect whatsoever there, you know.
Yeah. Dell Computers in Austin, Texas, scales right off the back of Intel as their biggest OEM. It allows, basically, Dell is the, you know, it was the early star of the distributed internet for personal computing. So you have a direct line from Intel Computing, a direct line from the beginning of Silicon Valley with Arthur Rock Venture Capital and Intel Computers, which the internet doesn't happen really without Intel Computers, right? And you have intellectual property rights. This is like the environment of which innovation began. Of course, you had you had DARPA, right? You had Xerox PARC. So you had the research element to that. But you have a direct spiritual succession line from Silicon Valley to Austin. That's what I look at, right? So then you got Dell Computers. Now today, look at all the money Dell put into UT research, equivalent to DARPA, Xerox PARC type of activity going on. And now we have the next generation, which is we have a big robotics company, Abtronic, here in Austin.
The tiny little race they had recently. Yeah.
Yeah, well.
A $900 million Series A is we're looking at some massive numbers now here for Austin.
I think it's important, though, to look at that as spiritual succession. Sometimes when we talk about competing ecosystems, right, we talk about them in terms of like a half a decade or a decade. But when you look at Silicon Valley, it took 50 years of research and development for Silicon Valley to actually appear, right, as what it is now. And also,
when you go back, same thing with when you look at like Industrial Manchester, Renaissance Florence, like these things that created. It's the only thing that drives me a little crazy is like innovation ecosystems existed before Silicon Valley. They've existed through the history of time. They look different, computers, technology, and all of that kind of stuff. Just like we think that which is also why I think that I think a spiritual succession is probably a good way to put it, because it's not going to be the same. Whatever comes next will
that's
never
what
be
I'm
the
saying.
same.
Like these comparisons they're not necessary. It's not. But I mean, you look at, they say history doesn't repeat, it rhyme.
Right.
You've heard that saying.
Yes.
Right. I think that's kind of what's going on here in Austin. I think it's very true. And I think when I go back to the unfairness of my comment that I made that we started the show off with, and I actually made this comment to a friend of mine the other day, which is all the hype that was being heaped on Austin in 2020, 2021, I think is actually true now. I think it was just the comments were a little bit early. Because we had the end of work from home, everybody left, not everybody. A few people left. A few people said, I like the lifestyle here. I like the pace here. A lot of family people stayed. So we ended up retaining a ton of knowledge here. And then it kind of evened out and smoothed out. And then you started seeing people really dig deep. And talent now is starting to be net migration here. That's actually happening, right? And so I don't think it needs to be comparative. Look, we've got a very, very cool ecosystem here.
It's interesting that you said that the stories was ahead of reality, which I actually think that becomes the power. The difference between, and it's interesting because I don't know if did you see about Palantir this morning? Yeah, so like,
Miami.
Yeah, Palantir with Miami. But it's interesting because obviously Miami in the last like couple of weeks has been having another moment. But it's interesting because I agree with you that when that hype was happening in Austin in 21, 22, that it was 2 or 3 years ahead of reality, right? And I think the problem that happened in Miami, so it'll be interesting to see what happens right now, is when Suarez did that tweet, how can I help you move to Silicon Valley to Miami? They were like 10 years ahead of reality.
Yeah.
And so that gap ends up having that kind of, then you're like, well, you're not getting it, and and then it's like, it's not real and all this kind of stuff versus my numbers probably up, but using like VC funding, they were like in the mid-teens, in 2020, and they're like 9th or 10th now. Like that's actually a pretty significant jump, and then it just takes time to compound on that. And so, yeah, I think that you have that hype, people kind of come, and it's interesting because both Austin and Miami are kind of having another moment where I was like, oh yeah, we're gonna dig in and grow, and then like, oh no, everyone's coming again.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think this time is actually real, and I think it's more real this time, based upon 2 specific things as the headlines, and there's a bunch of kind of subtext to it as well. One being this kind of almost antagonistic environment towards wealth that seems to be happening in California. So they have this really, really dysfunctional, state government seems to have this very dysfunctional relationship with their biggest taxpayers. And I don't understand that strategy. I just simply cannot understand that strategy. California has been a miracle story based upon kind of the unique environment that it has. And so why would you experiment or take a risk with that, right? But that's what they're doing. So that's one.
It's zero-sum thinking. It's like, well,
zero-sum thinking.
It can't grow anymore, so let me get my piece.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the second one is what's happening in Delaware, which is the Court of Chancery and how that's been politicized in some ways, which has really put a chill on formation through Delaware. And at the same time, Texas has upgraded its business court system, its business formation system that makes it very, very viable. And of course, the personal tax benefits to building a company and the incentive models to build a company and become extremely wealthy, all those things. I am a capitalist. Like I believe in the incentives to become wealthy, cause some people to work extremely hard, to press themselves, to go beyond their limits, to build things that we all end up benefiting from. And so you're seeing some, I think in the past it was very it was like symbolic change. Whereas now I think you're seeing some material changes that I think actually do kind of provide you with some questions to say, is there going to be some kind of sub-competing ecosystems? Not to say it's going to rival Silicon Valley, because again, I don't believe in let's create a rivalry chart. But I do think when you look at the key ingredients that are around Austin, it's interesting right now.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
And how much of, I think, and I think you would add New York to this list too, just like shooting themselves in the foot. My numbers may be wrong. So I read it one place, I never fully went after it. But it's 1/3 of Delaware's tax base is the business formation. If all that leaves and goes to Texas, Nevada, Wyoming, it's a bit of a hole you just created for the entire,
It's a bit of a hole. And then there's when you look at these things like Silicon Valley, they have the Big Bang moment, with Xerox PARC and with DARPA and some of the funding and venture capital as an innovation and all of those things. So it's sort of a Big Bang moment. And then you fast forward about 2 generations, and then you start seeing the heartbeat of the innovation environment appear, the brain of the innovation environment appear. Austin kind of has that going on right now, which is you can clearly see that the brain of this thing it's emerged, right? Robotics, AI, data centers are being built on natural gas fields, which is a huge innovation with the turbines and all those other things. We're an hour away from one of the biggest military installations in the world, Joint Base San Antonio, which is, by the way, where the NSA, all of their crypto stuff is, all the cryptographic stuff is. So huge defense budgets are right over there. Also, the cyber defense department is based at Joint Base San Antonio. So all of this NatDef stuff is an hour away. You've got all of this energy, on-prem energy, within an hour and a half, 2 hours outside of Houston with the nat gas fields where data centers are being built. You've got the university, which is a ton of research being commercialized. You've got state government as a headquarters right here. So you've got all this esoteric knowledge around how to procure through the state, how to sell to the government, and how to build for the government. And you've got anchor companies now. So you've got Teslas here. You've got all that going on. So the ingredients, the petri dish for an innovation zone are here. And there aren't too many innovation zones that have this many ingredients within a 200-ish square mile radius. So it's here. It is. I think it's materially happening.
Yeah, and it's. I think Carter put out some data that was this. Austin's one of the few places that's grown in its share, and it's kind of its position. It was 8th, 9th, 10th in 2020 consistently, and then it's solid 5th now. There was a Wall Street Journal article that came out recently that while the pie of venture capital funding has grown for everybody, the share, it was just SF and Austin are the only ones that kind of grew their share. Very different share. I'm not, when I talk about Austin, Silicon Valley to 10x. I'm I understand that. But you're right. It is this, when you think about robotics defense, these are the kinds of things you have the space. I remember having on, Isaiah from Valor in the Gundo, and John Coogan was on that episode as well. And there was an interesting discussion we had, which was, okay, when all of the guys in the Gundo have to build their gigafactories, it's not happening in LA.
Right.
You're going to do it in Texas, Ohio, Georgia, whatever like this. And so it's going to be interesting to see what happens at that phase. Do you have something like Tesla where the energy starts to move, where the headquarters is? I'd be very interested to see what happens with Arsenal 1 and Anduril. Does Ohio become more of a central point for it? I don't know.
No organism can grow without sunlight, right? You need sunlight. You have to have it. That's what permission is for builders. There has to be a permissive environment. And if people feel that the environment's permissive, they're just going to go there and build, right? That's one thing I saw in 2012, 2011 in Silicon Valley. It felt extremely permissive, if not almost encouraging you and pushing you to try more experiments. And what I feel right now that I'm not sure I felt 2-3 years ago, I thought it might begin to start being that way. But what I feel now is an extremely permissive environment. Extremely permissive environment, and that's attractive. That's extremely attractive. So I am very, very bullish on what I see happening right now. But again, I still think we're about 5 years out, 7 years out from it being obvious.
So what does obvious look like then? I feel like it's obvious now, and in that...
Sure, we're in the middle of it.
Sure.
It looks obvious to us.
Yeah.
It does look obvious to me. I'm saying to the broader world.
Yeah.
Of course that happened, that kind of thing.
I do feel like it's been interesting. There's been a shift in the last 6 months because there was like a Wall Street Journal article back in like May of last year. It was like the Austin tech boom's over. And I was like, okay, it was like 2 anecdotal stories from like one, like a guy who'd like been in 5 places in 3 years. And they used the Signal Fire data that I laughed. They didn't put up the chart because the actual chart says Miami and San Diego are the only ones that buck the trend of like everybody being down in like employment.
I love Miami, by the way. I just got back from there. Got so many friends there. I think that's going to be an awesome ecosystem.
I'm going there like next week. They'll have us on weather. No, like there's no.
They do have us.
Yeah. I moved from California. I was like, okay, like it's different here in terms of the weather. It's becomes a little more of a filter in that kind of sense.
Yeah.
But it was interesting because, like, look, there was a Washington Journal article on Zach Dell and like what he was building at base. There was a GQ article about all the defense here. There's like. So in some ways, I feel like the narrative is starting to change. Being like, I think Ashley Vance did a whole. I haven't seen it come out yet, but I know he was like touring around Texas for a little bit, and so I feel like it's starting to get more. I don't know if it's 5 to 7 years of it being obvious from the narrative perspective. Now, at what size? Do we pass LA or Boston? Okay, that's a step function, right?
Yeah, you just start to see all this like crazy institutional capture type energy happening when things are obvious. It becomes it's first the gold rush. Starts first, and then it becomes territory battles and entrenchments and tribal warfare. And those are like institutions that are coming to do a bunch of tribal warfare. I think that's what you start to see when it becomes super obvious. Mm-hmm. Right now, I think the builders who are building things that are important right now, the ones that I've met, the ones who I know, are trying to purposely keep it as quiet as possible. Somewhat because they're building for defense and they're building for all these other things where being flashy is not a net positive anyway. But
right.
But this is a very like quiet builder. I already know I'm wealthy or I'm going to be. I don't need to prove it to anyone. I'm heads down building type of place. And not saying Silicon Valley is not that place. I do think there's a ton of stuff going on in San Francisco and in the peninsula that's that way as well. If you're building a foundational model, you probably should only do it there. Like that's just point blank, and like we know
unless you're building something that is specifically different than the way the LLMs are being built there, and you want to be out of that bubble. But generally, I 100% agree. Like if you think about like Web AI here, which is a model company, and that like it's very very different the way they're doing it. So it makes sense to me that they would be here, not there.
I get that.
That is an edge case, right?
It's definitely an edge case. I still think that like it's hard not to have some at least emissary contact with that ecosystem.
Sure.
The pace that the foundational model ecosystem is moving at in San Francisco is so fast. It's unreal. Like you have to be there somewhat, at least I think. That's the future of software. I mean, it's the now of software. It's what the entire world is going to be built upon. It's what the entire world is being built upon. So it's an incredibly important place, and that's never going to stop.
No, this is where I get into like the first principles of ecosystems. I mean, you can think about it from sector perspective is the easiest way, but like if you're building a standard like drug therapeutic, go to Boston, right? That makes a lot of sense, right? And so you have those natures. Now, if you're building something that's a little bit different, the way they think about it, then you start having those kind of the cowboy attitude. Where does that work? Where does that fit, right?
Yeah, components, anything that is component reliant, componentized technology, I think you could say that Austin is probably the number one player there. Space tech, robotics.
It's where the AI and all this stuff hits the real world.
Yeah, energy infrastructure, all of those things where you're going to have to create very specialized software to help these components run efficiently. There is going to be still a moat. I think that's going to be the last barrier left that can't be vibe coded, which is the very specialized, frameworks that are built to run these componentized innovations. And so in that aspect, I think Austin has a very, very unique place that is very defensible from a moat standpoint. And I think that's why you're starting to see more LP dollars come this way.
Yeah. Yeah, and in having the specialized and just back to your point, the permission to build here, I think, goes from it always, I think, been in the culture, and then literally the regulatory of like, like the famous line that like Elon said was like, he built the Gigafactory faster than it would have taken him to get the paperwork done in
100%,
in
the
California.
Permits,
yeah,
100%. The environmental studies. That's a famous kind of stalling technique of California governments is all the environmental studies that have to be done. It's just been crazy to watch California shoot itself in the foot in that way. But it's kind of, I think it's somewhat good overall in that you really do have to be on the ground in person with these teams building. You can't, I believe remote works somewhat, but it breaks down. And so having several ecosystems that are specialists in different areas, I think is good. So not everybody can afford to live in San Francisco. It's like a 8 square mile radius. I mean, probably just from that standpoint alone, it's good for us to have several ecosystems operating.
Yeah, we almost moved. I was interviewing at Genentech and almost moved in from San Diego up there, and like it is just crazy. This was like, oh God, it must have been 2013, 2014, and it was one of the craziest things just in terms of this because it was like I was working at BD at the time. It was the first conversation, like, here's our relocation package. Wait, I just talked to you for 5 like that's the first thing the HR person can tell me, the relocation package. And then we're going to take you out the whole day. And I remember going like, so for the price of your house, you can have the 2-bedroom that's 20 minutes away. I was like, I have like small kids. Like that's not going to work. Or you can do the like East Bay, hour and a half, here's the shuttle kind of situation. I was like, we didn't end up doing the move because it wasn't that crazy. It's for a lateral, but
Crazy.
But it just, and that was then. I can only imagine now it's 10 times as bad.
I had a really nice house in Kansas City, 2 small children, got to Silicon Valley, was in an apartment, but opportunity costs.
Right.
So say I can only, to your point, it's probably 10 times worse now.
I didn't get into Stanford. That was the one school I didn't. And doing the math on it, the number of people who I would have been there at the same time with, I was like, oh, that's just great. It's okay. I'm not still bitter all these years later.
Yeah, you can't. There's a few universities you can't really replace, and UT is actually emerging in this way with Stanford. I mean, what happens on campus, it's just the natural ingress, egress with people,
Yeah.
Who you bump into. Now, I mean, that happens at the Battery a lot.
What's the Battery?
It's like Soho House, but in San Francisco.
Okay.
It's where half the ecosystem hangs out. A lot of investors, LPs, founders, et cetera. It's basically like Soho House.
So do you, I have heard through the grapevine that like Soho House here is not doing that well. I don't know for sure.
Well, they just went back private.
Okay, yeah, and I know, and like, look, I've been a couple times, like for people invited, and it's always like empty, so I don't quite It's an interesting, like when you have these third places, these kind of connective tissues, like the one, I think there's a natural element that has to happen, right? You can't be like
happen organically.
Yeah, this is the place. Like as soon as you say this is the place, it's not gonna be the place, right?
That's 100% right.
But yeah, and I think that is one of the things that I think is indicative of Austin in the negative sense is that it is still very fragmented, especially as it's getting bigger. And I think a couple of different things. One is that I think just a lot of people are heads down, right? And I've gotten into debates about like you do need to yell and be about kind of what's going on with somewhat people like just know what's going on. And what's also interesting is that there were a lot of people here who have since came out that they're here, but they were just like kind of moved in silence, right?
I got to tell you, this is a big phenomenon of being here, which is I've been here for 5 years now. I run across people all the time. I'm like, you visiting? No, I live here. You live here. How long have you been here? I've been here for 2, 3. This happens all of the time. Like, and I'm like, there's so many people I know in my network who have moved here quietly and live here, and I have no idea until I run across them.
Tell them to stop being quiet. Or what's the thought? Okay, steel man it for me. Like, why? Like, there's a lot of people I found out second and third hand. I'm like, wait, they're here?
I think it's real estate. Like, I can get to LA, I can get to New York, and I can have the house, and I can have somewhat of a network here. There's a lot of that driving.
So there's an interesting. That's gonna be like that's obviously the debate, obviously with Miami in this, in that. People are like, oh, they're just going there for the tax, and obviously with the the wealth destruction tax. That's obviously why they're kind of moving in that.
It's the yacht parties.
Yeah, person at all. Like I get seasick. Like you'll know like if I own the plane, I will never own the boat. That if things go well. But it's an interesting because if someone comes off on their own and head out, like I've just come into Texas for the tax purposes, in the middle of these kinds of things. When I see, because I know people who have done that, but then as soon as they start engaging, like some magic starts. Oh yeah, like there was I don't want to say who it was, but like there was a VC firm, their person moved here, and it was like they moved for that, like they wanted to be here for that for their reasons like that. No, the firm has like 10 people here, right? Because once they start getting involved, they're like, oh yeah, there's a whole lot here and it's amazing and all that kind of stuff.
I'm seeing that. A lot of venture capital firms are like opening little satellite offices here too.
You got to go
it's
poke
interesting.
A16Z. I don't know why they're not,
They are here.
Okay, they're not here loudly then enough to know that like there's actually a
Shout out to Paul Oates.
Okay.
Shout out. Paul, if you ever see this. That's why I'm being very intentional now, by the way, as well, which is like, I'm going to start doing these dinners and, good vibes, have a little DJ, a good chef, get a nice little spot that we can go to. And I'm going to start doing ecosystem dinners so that we can have these like ingress, egress points of like founders, investors, and stuff like that. I think more and more people that do that will get that connective tissue more. I am starting to see it more. I'm getting invited to more like founder and builder events, so I'm starting to see that happen. There was a big, huge Claudebot event last week. I was out of town. I wanted to go.
I was there.
But I heard you were there.
I was there for like the very end. Yeah, there was like.
I heard it was packed.
Yes, it was.
I love that.
Yeah, there was well, actually, this is totally the thing. Like, there was literally like the third event of that night that I had, and then like my wife had two separate events, and so like it was once you go out, you're like, well, I'm out. The kids are good. Might as well just say yes to everything.
You know how hard it is to get outside. Once I'm outside, I'm outside. So yeah. I heard it was lit.
It was lit. That was good. And then I think that's gonna grow a lot.
So more of that.
I do think that the difference that I have seen, as you say, like putting on dinners and getting people together, is that I was never in Silicon Valley, so I'm making an assumption, but it feels like you have to work harder here in the connection. Like the people who I feel like haven't succeeded are like, well, I moved here and it didn't just appear. Like, why didn't I get all the invites? Why didn't I get all the things? So like, what are you doing? Like you have to get out there,
I agree with that.
Versus it feels like Silicon Valley, like you walk.
Silicon Valley is just,
you walk down the street, you're like, I've got 90 people.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like in a box. You just open it up, everything's right there.
Right. You have the opposite problem, which is like, is it that one or that one? Or like the opportunity cost problem, right?
Yeah. Austin's kind of spread out in a very similar way that LA is. Not as big, obviously, but the same kind of thing where it's like, you're in Tarrytown, well, I'm in South Austin, or this person's over in East Austin. It's like, I'll see you, I guess, when I see you, which is a very LA thing. If you have friends on the other side of LA, you just don't see them. So Austin's obviously not that scope, that size of scope, but like there's a similar kind of, people kind of stick to their neighborhoods.
Okay. So,
you know what I mean?
Well, okay, I'm gonna push on again from, obviously I've been to like, Bay Area a lot. I hear people say that, but like Silicon Valley is from like San Jose to like, it's not small.
Caltrain.
It's used a lot?
A lot.
Okay.
Yeah. I was talking with my friend one day. I was like, I wonder how many world-class elite products, most of their code base was built on the Caltrain. A lot. Yeah. So, I mean, this is a lot of people like that ended up being, and then they had the Creamery for many years, which is closed now, which is like, once you get to San Francisco, it's a coffee shop right there. Mm-hmm. So everybody would just meet right there.
Okay.
Which I
got in.
Our version of that's probably like Cosmic.
I like Better Half, but that's
Better Half's good too.
It was Swedish Hill while they're doing all the things, but yeah, there does need to be it started, but it is funny because it does, I go to Better Half all the time, and then I'm just sitting there and like, this person written and that person written, like, there was I was there before this, and like late stage, VC that I knew, and that, so it does have that kind of connectivity being out, and you just kind of run into people, and then you're like, I haven't seen you in like 3 weeks, we should totally get the XYZ done, right? And so I think there is that density that's beginning to have, obviously nowhere near its scale at any of the other stuff, but you're starting to have those kind of random moments.
Yeah, and shout out to Josh Baer too, because what he's doing with Capital Factory has always been at the heart of like trying to build that community and succeeding in building that community, running a ton of events, doing a ton of things around this. And he's always been the open door, welcome mat, to Austin. So shout out to him, because I do think Capital Factory plays an important role in this ecosystem too around that.
Right. It's someone who, and I mean it's in the best possible way, who talks a lot, saying what's going on, getting on, getting that kind of narrative versus when I've seen, this was my biggest realization when moving here from San Diego, was everybody, like San Diego is an amazing ecosystem. Nobody knows that because nobody says anything. So it's like, oh, it's tiny, it's small. I was like, it was like the 5th largest for like 10 years. Like, it's gigantic. But because the storytellers, people who aren't getting out and saying like, here's what's going on. And what I've realized is that one of the key elements of storytelling are the VCs. And so one of San Diego's biggest issues was the lack of a homegrown VC market. Like most of the money was coming from the Bay. We're like, okay, I'm going to give you the check, and I want this company to do well. I have no reason to talk up, San Diego. Versus whether they're talking about, Silicon Valley or not. Most of the time, when talking about, whether it be A16Z or whoever, right, or like they're talking about the Bay Area, right? Like that's what they're talking about in that, and so it creates that narrative that says like, you came from Kansas City, you're like, well, I want to make it. I go there, right?
Yeah.
Same thing as the Hollywood effect. Like, I want to go be a star. I'm going to go to LA.
Yeah, you want to be an actor, you got to go to LA. You want to be a politician, you got to go to DC.
Right.
You want to be a banker, you got to go to New York. So.
And I think that's what we're starting. It's funny. I thought we were starting to hit. So I kind of put it like it was the last wave was like 19 to 24, right? That was the heavyweight. That's when a lot of the people, that we're talking about, we moved here. That was the important thing, right? So. And then I think it was starting to be that narrative wave now, which is, okay, everyone moved to Austin for Austin. Like I was the same, versus now you're like, I want to go for defense tents. I want to work for robots. I want to go for these things. And then now, of course, we've kind of had the opposite with, David Sachs, like I move in like this, like we're always back to the same kind of wave.
Yeah, it kind of feeds into like the overall vibe shift that happened
a
year and a half ago, 2 years ago, whatever, the overall vibe shift of people saying we don't want to be, politically, there was a vibe shift.
Yeah.
And then culturally, there was a vibe shift. And I think Texas aesthetics also played into that, which is, it's Texas.
Yeah.
So that played a big part of this as well. So it's just been interesting to watch.
Yeah.
I think it's been good.
On the ground, what do you think, besides more capital, more founders, more, and I totally agree. I think one thing that would really change the game also in Texas is getting rid of non-competes. Like I didn't quite realize, having been in California my whole life, like, because that was just standard. That was the thing. And then now, like, seeing that here.
Yeah, I actually think the entire way we think about formation is fundamentally outdated at this point in time. I think vesting periods are way too long now. Because the velocity of software building has sped up dramatically, the vesting periods probably should as well. So if I were to go and build a company right now, I'd probably like a 6-month vesting period for an engineer and give them the same amount of
6 month total.
6 month total with renewable.
Okay.
Right, which is 2 month cliff, and then vesting into the rest of it over that. Yeah, I think that's the velocity of software. I know this sounds insane. This sounds insane to say, but I think the opportunity cost for an engineer to be in your company for a year now is too great for them to wait a year to vest.
Mm-hmm.
For them to cliff. The pace of innovation and things are being shipped, the opportunity cost to them during this period of time is so great that in order for you to compete, if you got a startup, first of all, everything is coalescing to these 4 big labs. If you're building anything that's adjacent that starts to become successful, you're at great risk of being completely wiped out by the latest feature. I used to think
saw OpenClaw going to OpenAI.
Well, I used to think it was the stupidest question a venture capitalist could ask a founder, which is, what if Google builds that? Like, I used to hate that.
Right.
But it's actually a real thing now. Like, it actually is a real thing. Like, even if you have like the founder insights into why I'm building this company, it used to be Google's never going to be able to outcompete me because the product cycles in my head are so far ahead from an idea maze standpoint. I've gone through the idea maze. I understand why this product works. I understand why the user will behave this way. Whereas these big companies can throw like a piece of their P&L at this with like 20 engineers or whatever, and they'll never outcompete me, right? That was the kind of the old wisdom. That wisdom falls flat right now because the product cycles while building with AI are sped up in that way. I can learn that fast. So even if I don't have the original inspiration and intuition around the product, I can catch up to you in enough product cycles because of how the velocity of building products with AI is. And so I actually think for the first time ever, it's not a stupid thing if a venture capitalist says, what if OpenAI, what if Anthropic ships this, right? Because that's real. That's a real thing. And by the way, there's no loyalty to products anymore.
Your point, like Google kind of stumbled out of the. I mean, famously, they wrote the paper, right? And they stumbled out of the gate, and now so I was 85% like ChatGPT in a few other cases, and when Gemini 3 came out, all of a sudden I was like, oh, now I just spent too much. And he's all in like, this is for this is for that, and I'm always like.
And you got Kimi K25 now, like, it's awesome. It's like now we're like every Chinese model that ships, we're like, that's pretty sweet and a lot cheaper from a token standpoint.
I'm not touching any of those though. Like
I know, I get it.
But like I want I mean, so you've seen
can sandbox it.
You can't. Like I'm not good. But it is. I mean, like obviously I've seen like Seedance 2 online, and that is insane.
No, that's insane.
Like
Seedance 2 is unreal, and I'm hearing they're going to ship 3 like very soon. Like
so the same rumors you did. Yeah.
The amount of new film studios I know that are getting started right now, basically building out inference stacks in their apartment. It's like the new. It's crazy, like what's going on.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, like, Zachary Levi came on the podcast. We obviously got into this real deep about his position on it, and I still leaning towards, which I just might be interesting when you talk about like the company you're building, that we are in a moment of an explosion of like people can be artists, people can do these things, they can build out. We were talking about like editing podcasts here before. I mean, like like all of the, not this is gonna be a shock when everyone like watches the intro to this, but like all of the like non-clip parts of it were AI made, right? Because it's going inside a factory. Like I can't film that, I can't build it out, right? But it allowed me to do things that, and I'm gonna push it. And it says it didn't take anybody's job. It just wouldn't have been done. Like I never would have done it anyways if I had I just would have been like, here's just like a random intro, but like the music, everything kind of that, and it just like any tool. There was just some random thing I saw like the background music I will listen to when I'm working is all like Suno based. I've made it. It's background, that sort of stuff.
Yeah. So my insight around that
is
that Spotify and other streaming networks are probably cooked unless they buy Suno, because the gap between creation and consumption is closed, which gives an entirely different feedback loop. Because right now, what I'm waiting on is for major record label playlists to be curated for me. Or, as I spoke to one Spotify executive at one point in time, 80% of the listening is passive listening. Like Spotify is choosing what I listen to. I don't even know background for me. They're selling ads against that. That's their business. Fundamentally, that business is going to be disrupted because if the point of origination, point of creation is also the point of consumption, and music becomes personalized in that way. Like I'm making hyper-personalized art for myself, right? And I know there's going to be a bunch of controversy over this statement. Is this really art? Blah, blah, blah.
Sure.
I get that, and I respect artists, so I just want to put that out there for anybody hearing this. I respect artists, and this is a whole other debate. I'm not making a moral argument for AI being better than artists, so I just want to make sure that I'm clear on that. From a business and market standpoint, human behavior, markets behavior, the point of inspiration, point of creation being the same as the point of consumption is a big innovation in music and in movies.
But there's an interesting line, right? So I say like the background music, you're right, I've created and done this kind of stuff. Like literally, this was like yesterday, the day before, I don't know, like just scrolling through YouTube shorts too much. And there was just, I don't even know how to describe, like, I think the best way to describe it sounded like the guy was playing a sitar, but he's playing the piano. And it was the coolest thing I'd ever heard. Like, that was like an amazing, like, I think I've watched that video now at least like 100 and found other stuff. And like, the true talent of inspiration and like that kind of creation, like, there's gonna be stuff that, like, the crap techno music that and it's not me knocking techno music, I like techno music, but like the level of like that when I put into Suno to be like, I just want something energetic that I can write to, right?
Yeah.
It's very different.
And it's also just as sensitive to how good you are at writing prompts as an LLM is. And so if you get good at writing Udio prompts or Suno prompts, like you can make some really cool stuff, man. I've learned how to kind of work with both of those systems, and they're shipping incredible products. And what's funny is the public discourse disconnect to private use, which is I know so many artists that are using AI in their production flow publicly disavow the use of it. And I don't know how long that's going to go on for. I understand why it exists, but it is kind of funny because there are world-class artists who I've spent time in their studio setups and watched them implement AI. And then I've seen them on, on Instagram, whatever. Oh, we can't have AI and, all this other stuff. So it's just interesting from a cultural standpoint to watch that. But fundamentally from a market standpoint, from consumer behavior standpoint, the point of consumption and the point of creation being one and the same, hyper-personalized in that way, social feedback loops in that way, is an incredible shift in media that I don't think we fully understand how powerful that shift is yet. I mean, I saw Suno's published kind of numbers that they put out after their last round. They were talking about their growth numbers, and it's a lot of people are, I think Spotify and Apple Music, and they've got to really look at that.
But it isn't like, it just with the creation of synthetic media, whatever it may be, video.
So
well,
I've heard that, right? Synthetic media, right?
No, I don't know. I'm trying to figure out what the right word. I don't mean it negatively. I'm just trying to.
No, it's not negative.
I think then we're going to crave the other side more in terms of like tours are
100%
going huge. You want in real life, like there's this stuff, and so you end up like everything else at barbells.
Yes. Here's what I think. Here's what I think happens. Analog equipment is gonna explode again. Look at some of your analog makers like Moog, or I don't know. Let's just think through some of your like analog synthesizers and drum machines and stuff like that, where I have to have a skill I have to actually make that music in person. There's no like sequencer, software-based sequencer making the beat, quantizing it for me.
Right.
People are going to start to value someone being in front of them making this music. Again, like the craftsmanship of it, right? Venues. I believe live venues are going to be a big thing, but there's going to come a privatized live venue company, which is we're going to build the full stack, the tech, the building. You get access to, these residencies of these artists, things like that.
Yeah.
Those kind of experiences are going to be highly revalued, right, in this new world. On the other side of the equation, I don't necessarily think the creation of hyper-personalized music is a net negative for art, like some people do. I do think that the economics around it are going to change and your live performances are going to become a big thing, but I don't think the production of AI music or AI movies is a net negative to art. I think consumption demands it at this point in time.
Yeah, no, I think that it gives us a lot more. I think that at your point, it'd be interesting to figure out the economics on it, but because one, I think you enable other people, it becomes a different skill set, just like photography and painting, completely different skills.
My dad was a world-class musician. He played tour guitar for The Who, a studio
tiny little band.
Yeah, studio for Nat King Cole and the Beach Boys. He played rhythm guitar for those guys in the studio, and he went on tour with The Who. And then when John Entwistle left The Who to form his new band, Rigor Mortis, he left and was the lead guitarist for Rigor Mortis. So if you go on YouTube and you look up, Old Grey Whistle Test, which was a BBC show, and put in Rigor Mortis or put that in there, you'll see my dad up there. So long story short, my dad built the schematics for an electric guitar that was, the IP of that guitar was stolen by a big guitar manufacturer because he was a musician. He just wasn't good at business. And so I have a very strong relationship with like creation and taking things that belong to other artists and things like that. So I don't want to trample on that because that's core to my ethic. But one thing, the reason why I bring this up is nobody complained when the drum machine dropped. Studio drummers were out of work because now you have Roger Lynn drops the Lynn drum, which then Roland Corporation comes in and makes the 808 machine and the 707 machine. And suddenly like half of all music, especially pop music in the 80s and 90s, ran on 8s and 707s and 606s and Lynn drums and then MPCs later, which then the advent of hip hop music and sampling. And then the DAW came along, the digital audio workstation, which was software that replicated the entire recording process from tracking to mastering, mixing, all of those things that you could do very, very cheaply using software like Fruity Loops, Pro Tools, etc. Nobody really made a big deal out of that all these studio workers are going to be. And so I've found it, what's been difficult to me is we've always celebrated these automations in music, but suddenly this one is a step too far. This one is the automation where it's like, hold on. This is too far.
How do you think about the business model? Because I'm torn. I get I get both arguments. You're training off of my music, my writing, whatever, right? Both in the LMs and the Suno. It's in the.
And by the way, I'm heavily for if we can show that you've been training on copyrighted material, those artists should be paid for that.
Okay, but
I'm heavy on that.
how do you balance the other side? Because you and I listen to and read copyrighted material and are trained as human beings on that. I see both sides, and I understand the point of like you have this copyright. You know, I mean, obviously all this stuff we're talking about. We started this with Seedance. Clearly, all that violates copyright when I've got Batman fighting Deadpool.
It's murky. I've probably spent over the last 3 years. Yeah, I've probably spent over the last 3 years hundreds of hours with some of the top IP counsel in the world, talking through the murky environment of copyrights, performance rights, likeness rights, and understanding each.
What's performance rights?
So if you in the music business, if you play somebody's work in a commercial situation, that's a performance.
Yeah.
It's considered a performance. They need to be paid for that, right? In this case, the venue is, this website that is essentially you can reproduce. And so there was this, I don't know if you saw, part of the why UMG was able to strike a deal with these companies is they had forensic experts prompt almost exact replicas of copyrighted songs using the right prompts. They were able to kind of prove that mathematically
it's in there.
Mathematically speaking, it's almost impossible you didn't train on this song. I wouldn't have been able to do this. So neither here nor there. But when I spent time with them, the one thing I've learned is that, like, first of all, for starters, this is going to take years to fully get settled in case law. It's so murky. There's so many interpretations of old laws, like Bette Midler versus Ford Company, Tom Waits versus Frito-Lay, which are old cases where their voices were replicated and used and blah, blah, blah. Those have been used as precedents. Those precedents have been used to help litigate in this new era, but there's all types of edge cases now that are being litigated as well. Everybody benefits, I think, from settling all of this litigation, which is why you're seeing some of these partnership agreements between the big record labels, and I think the movie studios are probably going to strike similar deals. Everybody wants to see new episodes of Seinfeld, right? So why not just, if Elaine owns syndication rights to Seinfeld, why don't we just pay Elaine and just give everybody new episodes, right? I think we'll eventually get to this place where there'll be standards. We're not there right now. Yeah,
the Wild West is it's painful and valuable because sometimes as soon as you set down the boundary points to the sandbox, like, that's it. This is the way it is. Like, what if we weren't there yet? And that's always the kind of the regulatory and it's like, it's UMG. It's like, it's always the big guys who are then setting the boundary things. You're like, well, what if we want to,
You really have to understand the entertainment industry as a layer cake of interdependencies and like, there's a bunch of incentives in those interdependencies, meaning, like, for 50, 60 years, managers, agents, unions that represent the studio workers, film crews, whatever, this entanglement of people who got paid whenever work was produced and the entrenched kind of institutions around it run deep. And also it's very, very personal. These are personal relationships that this thing runs on, and a very small amount of personal relationships. And so to some extent, there's no way to innovate around that. Like, many of a startup has gone to LA and
it's not
up in the graveyard.
It's not a technology issue.
It's not a technology. It's a people issue.
Right.
People have to agree.
Right. If you use the technology or use the innovation to change the incentives, then things start to move.
But you know what? People don't know if the incentives are real yet. They need to know that these businesses work. They need to know that they can produce real cash flow, and they need to know what their representation is inside of that cash flow. Until they know that, they're just going to operate the way they've always operated, which is, okay, just pay me up front.
Yep.
Cover my downside today so I never have to worry about it. And so if for startups that want to build in that ecosystem, you just have to spend tens of millions of dollars of venture capital up front on securing people's consensus.
Yep. Easy.
Yeah, very easy.
All right, so we're hitting up a time, and I knew we'd end up going down some random rabbit holes. We always do. I want to end it with the same question I was going to ask everybody. This is the new question for this year. So we're looking ahead to kind of what's next on your radar. What's the next, like, trend, technology, experiment that you think really represents a possible, like, hinge point coming up?
I'm going to say the most boring thing ever because it's the most obvious thing ever. And this is going to be kind of cringe in how boring and obvious it is. In that, I mean, agentic is here. If you're not building agentically, and I think people, because we're so close to it, we think that it's already over with. I think we're very early, extremely early. I think there are hyper niche cases that are very lucrative markets for all of this type of work to be built. It's exciting in that you don't need a team of 5 engineers, 10 engineers, 20 engineers. And goes back to my 6-month vesting, which is if you get the amount of work done for 5 engineers, then why not give 5 engineers worth of equity to one person over a shorter period of time? Then you can realign the incentives again and potentially get the kind of talent you need.
There's your 100x engineer.
There's your 100x engineer, but you're obviously going to run more experiments as well, right? So in a 2-year period where you might have ran 3 experiments, now you're going to run 20, right? And so I think that is what is extremely exciting to me. Obviously, media and entertainment is core and central to me. But look, anything in sales, biz dev, user acquisition, anything that needs an engine like that, I think it's an exciting time to build those businesses. Science and research.
Yep.
So your bailiwick, UT here, the Dell Medical Center, and all of the research and investment that's going into medical devices right now. Again, componentized tech, amazing what's going to be happening there, especially when you add the intelligence of,
all of it,
10,000 years of human history inside of a device. I think these are very, very, interesting times. Being in Austin while all its componentized tech is taking off as well. So robotics and space tech and all these things. So I could just go down the line, but extremely exciting time, scary time. Obviously, we've got some scary grams on the internet. Big things are happening. If you read that, and then Ray Dalio obviously sent us scary gram.
you guys saw both of those, yeah.
The world's over. All these other things.
I'm slightly more optimistic.
I'm slightly more optimistic because you have to be, right? I mean, if you actually read that and believed it, you just have to give up, and we can't give up.
Yeah.
Can't give up. So
no. Now look, we're building the future. Things are happening. Like the future we're starting to see in our streets and in space. Like, I mean, you get back to like the idea, like, or whatever, we had coffee the other day, and we had that long conversation about like orbital data centers. Like the things you read about sci-fi are being like talked about now. Like, Elon was on Cheeky Pint talking about like mass drivers on the moon. Like, this is stuff we can see soon.
Yeah, he was like, Mars might take so long, so we're just gonna do the moon instead. Okay,
That
sounds good.
It's a fun time. Thanks so much for joining the show.
Thanks for having me, man.